The first thing you need to picture is an entire neighborhood underwater. Lawns that once hosted barbecues now looked like muddy lakes. Cars sat half submerged. Patio furniture floated aimlessly across backyards. My own shed stood in 3 feet of brown water, and my neighbor's brand new mower was swallowed whole. This wasn't a natural disaster. This was man-made, forced on us by the very HOA that was supposed to protect our community. And the one who pushed it all, Karen Whitfield, the president who fined me $50,000 for building the one thing that had kept this creek under control, my dam. She laughed when they made me tear it down. She thought she'd won. But as I stood there watching her kingdom drown, I knew the tide had just turned. Before I take you back to where it all began, and how I proved every lie she forged, drop a comment with your location and the time where you're watching this. When the flood finally receded, leaving behind layers of foul-smelling mud and wrecked property, I couldn't stop replaying in my mind how this all began. Because it hadn't started with a storm, or even with water. It started with a simple envelope, white, unremarkable, the kind you'd normally throw on the kitchen counter and forget until after dinner. That morning, the sun had been slanting through the blinds, the smell of coffee filling my little house. I'd been retired from electrical work for nearly 3 years, living quietly in Clearwater Ridge, a neighborhood built on the edges of Red Willow Creek. I had my routines, fixing things around the house, tending my vegetable garden, tinkering with old radios. My wife called it tinkering, but to me it was a way of staying sharp. Life was steady, predictable, safe. That's why when I slid open that envelope, I thought it was just another HOA newsletter about lawn heights or trash pickup. Instead, my eyes froze on the bold red letters, assessment $50,000. For a moment, I thought my old eyes were playing tricks. 50,000, I read it again. Then a third time. It wasn't a typo. The violation listed was unauthorized construction and alteration of community water flow. My hands shook as I lowered the paper. They were talking about the dam. Now, I wasn't some reckless amateur throwing rocks into a creek. I'd lived in this house for 3 decades. I'd seen what happened every spring when storms rolled down from the mountains. Red Willow Creek would roar out of its bed, turn yards into swamps, and leave behind rot and ruin. My neighbor George once lost a lawnmower to the muck. Clara across from him had her flower beds wiped out every year. And me, I watched water crawl closer and closer to my foundation, each storm daring me to do something. We'd complained to the HOA for years. They sent out committees with clipboards knotted thoughtfully, then sent back letters saying any large-scale mitigation was cost-prohibitive, which in HOA speak meant not our problem. So I made it my problem. I studied. I read manuals, called up an old buddy from the power plant who knew about drainage, even drove out to the county library to check engineering basics. For months, I planned it like a wiring project: measure twice, cut once. Then I built a reinforced weir across the narrowest bend of the creek at my property line. Concrete, rock, careful placement of flow channels. It wasn't pretty, but it was solid. When the next storm came, the creek swelled pressed against the dam, and for the first time in years, it didn't spill into our yards. The water slowed, redirected into a natural runoff ditch, and drained safely away. George and Clara were ecstatic. They brought me whiskey. We toasted to dry basements and common sense. And now the HOA wanted $50,000 from me for it. I scanned the letter again. It was signed by Karen Whitfield, president of the HOA, a woman who wore her clipboard like a badge of royalty. I'd seen her at meetings, sharp suits, sharper smile, a voice that dripped false sweetness. She loved her power, but this was different. The language was threatening: liens on my house, daily compounded interest, if unpaid, even hints of criminal action. Attached to the letter were county permits, photocopies with smudged signatures and warped seals. Even to my untrained eye, they looked fake. At first, I told myself it was a mistake, that all I needed to do was call and clear it up. I picked up the phone, dialed the number, and after 2 rings, Karen herself answered. Clearwater Ridge, HOA. This is Karen speaking. She said, her tone honeyed and sharp all at once. Karen, this is Cole Hartman, I began calmly. I received a notice for $50,000. It must be a typo. The dam was... There is no mistake, Mr. Hartman, she interrupted smoothly. You built an unauthorized structure that violates community water regulations. The fine stands. I tried to explain that the so-called regulations she cited weren't in the HOA charter, that the dam actually solved a flooding problem the HOA had ignored for years. My neighbors support it, I said firmly. She chuckled, a sound that made my skin crawl. We are not governed by what pleases your friends, Mr. Hartman. We are governed by the rules. Pay the fine or we will take further action. And then she hung up. I stood in my kitchen heart, pounding the phone, still buzzing in my hand. This wasn't a mistake. This was an attack. That night, I pulled out a box of old HOA correspondence, letters acknowledging the flooding problem, photos of my backyard underwater dated and stamped, receipts for concrete rebar and gravel. I laid it all out like evidence in a courtroom. As an electrician, I'd learned to trust the details. Circuits don't lie, and neither did my records. The next morning, I emailed the entire HOA board. My message was polite, professional, but firm. I laid out the history of flooding, the HOA's refusal to act, the dam's success, and photos showing dry yards after the storm. I requested a meeting. Days passed with silence. Finally, one reply came, not from Karen, but from Ethan Cole, a junior board member. His tone was cautious. "I understand your position, but President Whitfield is adamant. If you apologize formally and submit a plan to remove the dam, the board might reduce the fine." Reduce? I nearly laughed. Reduce from extortion to robbery. Why should I apologize for saving our homes? Still, it was the only glimmer of reason I'd seen. That same evening, I looked again at the permits Karen had attached. The county seal seemed off. Too stretched, too blurry. On a hunch, I pulled up the official Clearwater County seal from the government's website. The difference was glaring. Karen's version looked like a bad photocopy. That's when my disbelief turned into cold, sharp anger. This wasn't about landscaping rules. This was fraud. She was trying to steal $50,000 using forged government documents. From that moment on, the fear I'd felt melted away, replaced by something else: determination. Karen had made the biggest mistake of her life. She thought she could bully me into submission. She thought I was just another retiree with too much time on his hands. But she didn't know that I had the patience of an electrician tracing a fault line following the circuit until it revealed the truth. This wasn't just about a dam anymore. This was about standing up to corruption, about showing the entire neighborhood that one woman's greed and forged papers couldn't erase the truth. The morning after I uncovered that forged county seal, I knew I couldn't sit idle. Karen wasn't bluffing. She was willing to use fake paperwork and intimidation to squeeze 50 grand out of me. And if she got away with it, what would stop her from doing the same to every other homeowner in Clearwater Ridge? I started by documenting everything. I scanned the fine notice, highlighted the bogus regulations she cited, and printed side-by-side comparisons of the fake seal versus the real one from the county website. I organized them into a binder, the kind I used to keep for complicated electrical jobs. Every page labeled, every date noted. If Karen wanted a fight, she was going to get it in black and white. But evidence alone wasn't enough. I needed to understand the terrain I was standing on, legally speaking. That meant taking a hard look at what authority the HOA actually had. So I drove down to the county clerk's office. The lady at the counter, tired but kind, pulled up Clearwater Ridge's charter documents. I read through them carefully, page by page. There were landscaping ordinances, noise rules, even a clause about keeping pets leashed, but not a single line about community water regulations. It confirmed what I already suspected: Karen had made the whole thing up. That afternoon, I returned home to find a sheriff's cruiser idling in my driveway. My heart lurched. The deputy inside stepped out tall and lean, his uniform crisp. He introduced himself as Deputy Luis Morales. "Mr. Hartman, I've been asked to deliver this," he said, handing me a folded document. It was a cease and desist order demanding the immediate removal of the dam within 48 hours. The language was dense, dripping with legal jargon, but the message was clear: take it down or face charges. "Deputy," I said carefully, my voice tight, "this is a civil matter. The documents they're using are forged. I can prove it." His eyes were flat, unreadable. "I'm not here to debate. I'm here to serve the notice. If you don't comply, the HOA can seek an injunction. And if that happens, you could be held in contempt." I wanted to argue, to shout, but I held my tongue. He tucked his hands behind his belt, gave a short nod, and walked back to his cruiser. Karen's SUV was parked a few houses down. I caught a glimpse of her in the driver's seat, smirking, as the deputy drove away. That night I barely slept. Fear gnawed at me, but beneath it simmered rage. They wanted to break me down, make me feel powerless. But I wasn't powerless. I had facts, evidence, and experience on my side. The next morning I called someone I trusted, Dr. Elena Park. We'd worked together years ago, at the power plant, me running electrical systems, her tackling structural engineering. If anyone could give my dam legitimacy, it was Elena. "Cole," she said over the phone, "I'll be there this afternoon. Don't touch a thing until I get a look." When she arrived, she didn't waste words. She put on her reading glasses and flipped through every document I had laid out on the dining table. When she reached the forged permit, she barked a laugh. "This is embarrassingly sloppy," she said. "The font isn't even consistent, and this regulation code doesn't exist." I checked it on the drive over. Then she walked with me to the backyard. She measured the dam's thickness, examined the overflow channel, checked the reinforcement, and even tapped her boot against the concrete to listen for hollowness. After 20 minutes of inspection, she crossed her arms. "Cole, this isn't just a pile of rocks. This is a properly constructed gravity weir. It does exactly what it should: slow the water, redirect the excess safely. You've essentially done their job for them." Hearing it from her, an expert, was like a weight lifting off my shoulders. "Would you put that in writing?" I asked. "Not just in writing," she replied. "I'll give you a stamped report." Over the next 2 days, we turned my backyard into a laboratory. Elena installed a water gauge behind the dam. We set up a log recording creek levels every hour. I configured my security camera to capture a time lapse during storms. By the end of the week, we had a mountain of data charts, photos, a professional engineering report signed and stamped. All of it proved that the dam was safe, functional, and preventing property damage. Armed with this, I drafted a demand letter to the entire HOA board. The tone was professional but firm. I laid out the history of the flooding problem, the HOA's refusal to address it, and the effectiveness of my solution. I included Elena's report, the water logs, and a side-by-side comparison of the forged seal versus the real one. My demand was simple: rescind the fine, issue a formal apology, and cease all threats. I sent it via certified mail, ensuring there'd be proof they'd received it. For the first time in weeks, I felt confident. How could they argue with hard evidence from a licensed engineer? How could they ignore data photos and timestamps? But confidence has a way of being tested. Because just when I thought I'd cornered Karen, she struck back harder. 3 days later, another white envelope appeared in my mailbox. Inside was a new fine, $10,000, this time for installation of unauthorized surveillance equipment. They were talking about my little wildlife camera, the one pointed at the dam. Karen claimed it was violating neighbors' privacy. Attached was yet another flimsy bylaw, one that didn't exist in the HOA charter. I laughed bitterly as I read it. She hadn't even acknowledged Elena's report or my letter. Instead, she'd shifted the battlefield. If I proved the dam was legal, she'd attack the camera. If I disproved that, she'd invent something else. But what she didn't realize was that by escalating, she was only giving me more opportunities to catch her in the act. That night, I adjusted the angle of my own camera just slightly. In addition to monitoring the water, it now had a perfect view of the lamppost across the street, where, to my disbelief, 2 brand-new high-definition cameras had appeared, both aimed squarely at my house. Karen wasn't hiding anymore. She was watching me openly, daring me to react. And I wasn't about to let her down. The day those 2 high-definition cameras showed up on the lamppost across the street, I realized Karen had crossed a new line. It wasn't just fines or forged documents anymore. This was surveillance intimidation designed to break me. I stared at those black lenses glaring at my front porch and backyard, and a bitter laugh escaped me. The HOA fined me for 1 wildlife camera aimed at my own dam, yet here she was planting industrial-grade eyes to track my every move. I called Elena immediately. "You won't believe this," I told her. She came over that afternoon, squinting at the cameras with a mix of disgust and amusement. "She's desperate," Elena muttered. "Desperate people make mistakes." That night, as rain started drizzling, my camera caught something extraordinary. An unmarked white van pulled up to the lamppost. A man in a plain uniform got out, climbed a ladder, and began tinkering with one of the cameras. 5 minutes later, a familiar SUV rolled into frame Karen's. She stepped out, handed the man a sheet of paper, and gestured toward my house. He nodded, then continued adjusting the lens until it pointed directly at my backyard. I couldn't hear their words, but I didn't need to. Their body language said it all. This wasn't official HOA business. It was personal. My camera captured every second, time-stamped in crisp resolution. Another piece of evidence. Another nail in the coffin she was building for herself. Still, Karen wasn't finished. 2 mornings later, I received yet another notice. This time, a fine of $5,000 for unsecured construction materials. The evidence attached a blurry photograph of my wheelbarrow and 2 bags of concrete sitting next to my shed, supposedly taken that same morning. The problem: I had put those materials away inside the shed the night before. Suspicious, I scrolled back through my footage, and there it was at 6:15 a.m., long before sunrise, Karen's SUV crawling past my house, stopping briefly in front of the shed. The next frame showed her silhouette raising what looked like a phone camera. She had staged the entire violation herself, fabricating proof for yet another fine. I felt anger, yes, but also a strange sense of vindication. She wasn't outsmarting me, she was digging her own grave. Later that week, the harassment took on an even more theatrical twist. As I trimmed the hedges in my front yard, Trent Doyle, one of Karen's most loyal enforcers on the HOA board, marched straight across my lawn with a clipboard. Trent was a big guy, broad-shouldered, with a permanent scowl etched into his face. He didn't bother with pleasantries. "Karen sent me," he boomed. "There are reports of leaks at your dam. I need to inspect it." "Be my guest," I said calmly, slipping my phone into my shirt pocket with the recorder running. He stomped around the dam for less than 30 seconds, poking a boot here, scribbling nonsense on his clipboard there. Then he left without another word. That evening, as if on cue, a fresh violation appeared in my inbox, $5,000 for structural instability, citing Trent's inspection report. But this time I had him cold. My camera had recorded his laughable 30-second inspection. My pocket recorder caught him muttering under his breath, "Looks fine to me," before striding away. The so-called report was a forgery, plain and simple. With every new violation, my binder grew thicker: photos, video clips, audio files, professional reports, timelines. I was building a case stronger than steel rebar. But Karen's harassment wasn't just aimed at me anymore. George, my neighbor who had signed the letter of support for me, received a warning that his grass was half an inch too tall. Clara got cited for having a non-compliant mailbox color. It was vindictive, targeted punishment, and it worked. The neighborhood grew quiet. People who once waved at me across the street now looked away, afraid of becoming the next target. That silence hurt more than the fines. For a while, I felt like I was standing alone against an entire machine. But then one evening, George knocked on my door. He was holding a folded piece of paper. "I've had enough of her," he said firmly. The paper was a statement of support signed by every homeowner on our side of the cul-de-sac. It confirmed that the dam had solved the flooding problem and that my camera never invaded anyone's privacy. I nearly choked up. Karen thought she'd isolated me, but she had awakened something stronger: community. That night I went a step further. Sitting at my desk, I drafted a simple one-page guide titled HOA Harassment Log. It laid out 3 steps: save every email or letter. Photograph whatever they claim is a violation with timestamps. Keep a written log of every interaction. I printed 20 copies, and after dark, I walked the neighborhood, slipping one into each supportive neighbor's mailbox. It wasn't much, but it was a weapon: knowledge. Meanwhile, Elena urged patience. "Don't let her provoke you," she advised. "She thrives on reaction. Keep documenting, keep collecting. Eventually, her lies will collapse under their own weight." And collapse they did. Because the very next week, Karen attempted her boldest move yet. Deputy Morales showed up again, this time with Karen at his side, her arms folded smugly. The deputy's voice was harder now, more formal. "Mr. Hartman, the HOA is filing a criminal trespass complaint. According to these documents, your dam encroaches on common drainage land." He held up a piece of paper and my jaw clenched. It was another map one, where Karen had literally redrawn the property lines, shifting the creek bed into HOA territory. My dam, once squarely on my land, now appeared to straddle community property. "This is my property," I said, my voice shaking with rage. Morales didn't flinch. "You'll need to comply with the order. If not, you could be arrested." For the first time, I felt the full weight of what Karen had unleashed. She wasn't just fining me anymore. She was trying to brand me a criminal. My rights, my reputation, even my freedom were now at stake, all because one woman couldn't stand being challenged. But as Karen stood on the sidewalk, her smirk carved deep across her face, I realized something. She had overplayed her hand. And that mistake was going to cost her everything. When Deputy Morales left my porch that day, with Karen trailing behind him like a conquering general, I stood frozen in my doorway. The accusation of trespass cut deeper than any fine. She wasn't just threatening my money anymore, she was threatening my freedom. The idea that I could be arrested for standing on my own property made my stomach churn. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized something important: Karen had finally gone too far. A forged map wasn't a clever ploy, it was a desperate gamble. And desperation makes people sloppy. I went inside, sat down at the kitchen table, and opened my binder. By now it was bulging every page, a piece of evidence in the war she had declared against me. Forged seals, fake bylaws, video proof of staged violations, and now a falsified property map. I had enough ammunition to level her entire house of cards if I used it right. That night, Elena came over. She had a bottle of wine tucked under her arm and her brow furrowed. "I heard about Morales showing up again," she said, setting the bottle on the counter. "Cole, this is escalating faster than I thought, but she's making mistakes. Big ones." I showed her the new map. Elena studied it, comparing it against the plat map from my deed. "This isn't just wrong," she muttered. It's absurd. She shifted the boundary nearly 15 feet. Any county surveyor could dismantle this in 5 minutes. That's the problem, I said, rubbing my temples. She doesn't need it to hold up in court forever. She just needs it to scare me into submission. If I cave, she wins. Elena poured 2 glasses of wine. Then, don't cave, we fight. But we do it strategically. She's baiting you into lashing out. If you lose your cool, you give her leverage. We need patience. Patience wasn't my strong suit, but in that moment I knew she was right. The very next morning, Karen doubled down. A glossy special edition HOA newsletter landed on every doorstep in Clearwater Ridge. On the front page, there was a grainy photo of me standing on my porch with Deputy Morales, his hand resting near his holster. The headline screamed, "HOA protects community from illegal structure resident cited for trespass." The article painted me as a reckless rule breaker, a danger to the neighborhood. It claimed my dam had weakened creek banks and endangered foundations, all lies backed by her inspection reports. I felt my blood pressure spike as I read it, but what hurt worse was the way my neighbors reacted. People who used to wave at me now crossed the street. I caught whispers through open windows. "Did you hear about Cole? I guess that dam really was illegal." My support, fragile as it was, started crumbling. Even George and Clara seemed hesitant to stand too close, though I knew they were still on my side privately. Fear was Karen's greatest weapon, and she wielded it like a sword. That night, I sat at the table with my wife, Sarah. She'd been strong through all of this, but now I saw fear etched into her face. "Cole," she said softly, "maybe it's time to give up. Tear down the dam, pay the fine. It's not worth jail." I looked at her, the woman I'd built a life with, the woman who had stood by me through every storm and hardship. The thought of letting her down was unbearable, but so was the thought of surrendering to Karen's lies. "If I give up now," I whispered, "she'll know she can do this to anyone. To George, to Clara, to families who don't have the means to fight back." Sarah didn't argue. She just squeezed my hand, her eyes shining with worry. The following morning, I made a decision. I would comply with the injunction and dismantle the dam, but not out of defeat. I would do it to prove a point. I called a local contractor with a small excavator. He agreed to come the next day. The skies were gray and heavy when the machine rolled into my backyard. Each crunch of concrete and splash of rock into the dump truck felt like a blow to my chest. 2 months of labor gone in hours. I took photos time-stamped and sent them to the HOA with a curt email. "The structure has been removed per court order." No reply from Karen. She didn't need to reply. She thought she had won. But nature has a way of revealing the truth. That night, the skies opened up. Rain poured down in sheets, relentless, pounding the rooftops like war drums. By morning, Red Willow Creek had transformed into a monster. Water surged through the cul-de-sac, swallowing lawns, sheds, and patios. George's brand-new mower vanished beneath the current. Clara's patio furniture bobbed like toy boats. My own shed stood in waist-deep water tools floating like driftwood. I stood at my back window staring at the destruction with a strange mixture of sorrow and grim satisfaction. This was exactly what I had warned them about. The dam had been the only thing holding back disaster, and Karen had forced me to tear it down. Now her kingdom was drowning in the mess she created. Neighbors called in a panic. George's voice cracked over the phone. "Cole, you've got to see this. The creek's out of control." Clara's voice followed, trembling with fear. "It's worse than ever. The water's nearly at my back door." I grabbed my camera and rushed outside, rain pelting my face. I recorded everything, time-lapse footage of the flood, swallowing the cul-de-sac, high-resolution photos of ruined property, video clips of water seeping into foundations. My wildlife camera, the very one Karen had fined me for, captured the surge in stunning detail. For 2 days, I did nothing but document. When the waters finally receded, the neighborhood looked like a war zone. Mud caked everything. George's mower was ruined. Clara's patio was buried under silt. My own yard was scarred beyond recognition. But in the wreckage, something changed. The whispers about me stopped. In their place came anger, directed not at me, but at the HOA. Neighbors who had believed Karen's lies now stood ankle-deep in mud, asking the same question: why did the HOA force Cole to tear down the dam that saved us? Karen's smug victory had backfired spectacularly. Her power, once absolute, was beginning to crack, and I knew then that the fight was far from over. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every resident of Clearwater Ridge who had suffered under her reign, and I had all the evidence I needed to bring her empire crashing down. The storm that destroyed our cul-de-sac was more than just rain, it was revelation. By dawn, the damage was undeniable. The culvert overflowed, lawns looked like ponds, and homes stood scarred by mud. The dam I'd been forced to demolish would have absorbed that surge. Karen's victory had exposed her as reckless. I knew then my private battle needed to become a public one. I didn't start by calling a lawyer. Lawyers cost money I didn't have, and Karen thrived in closed-door skirmishes. What she feared most was exposure. So I picked up the phone and called the investigative team at Channel 9 News. They had a reputation for taking on corrupt landlords and shady city contracts. If anyone could shine a spotlight on Karen, it was them. Channel 9 tip line, the receptionist answered. "My name's Cole Hartman," I said, steadying my voice. "My HOA used forged documents to fine me $50,000. They forced me to tear down a flood control dam. Now the entire neighborhood is underwater. I have proof emails, maps, a licensed engineer's report video of the flood, everything." There was a pause, then a quiet reply, "Please hold." Minutes later, a reporter named Lana Chu came on the line. Her tone was skeptical but curious. "Mr. Hartman, those are serious accusations. You say you have proof." "More than proof," I said. "I have a binder that'll make your jaw drop." She agreed to meet me the next day. That night, Elena and I spread every scrap of evidence across my dining table. Photos of dry lawns when the dam stood, videos of water cascading safely into the runoff channel. The forged seal compared side by side with the county's real one. The audio of Trent Doyle's fake inspection. The footage of Karen staging a violation at 6 in the morning. And now the flooding aftermath, George's mower rusting in brown water, Clara's patio submerged. Elena organized it, chronologically turning chaos into a narrative. "It has to be simple," she said. "A story people can follow from start to finish. They find you. They lied. They forced you to tear down the dam. And now this." She gestured to a photo of muddy water lapping against my shed. The next day, Lana arrived with a cameraman. She was sharp-eyed, mid-30s, with a voice that carried authority. "Show me," she said, notebook ready. I didn't rant. I didn't rave. I walked her through the binder step by step. She scribbled notes furiously, occasionally glancing at Elena for technical confirmation. When I showed her the property map Karen had falsified, Lana's eyebrows shot up. She redrew the boundary line. "Yes," I said. And the deputy acted on it. We moved outside where the smell of wet earth lingered. I showed her the ruined dam site, now a scarred gap where water had cut deep trenches. George and Clara joined us, their voices shaking with anger as they described their losses. George pointed at his mower, half submerged in muck. "That thing cost me $2,000. Gone because she wanted to play queen of the neighborhood," Clara added. "We begged the HOA for years to fix the flooding. Cole did it himself, and she punished him." The cameraman captured it all: muddy boots, ruined gardens, faces lined with frustration. It wasn't just my story anymore. It was the story of a neighborhood betrayed. 2 nights later, the segment aired on the 6 o'clock news. The broadcast opened with sweeping drone footage of our cul-de-sac drowned in muddy water. Then came the interview clips, me at my table, Elena explaining the engineering, George and Clara showing their wrecked yards. They zoomed in on the forged seal, highlighting the distortions. They played the clip of Trent's laughable 30-second inspection. And then, as the kicker, they caught Karen leaving a grocery store. "Miss Whitfield," Lana asked, microphone thrust forward, "did you forge documents to fine your neighbor $50,000?" Karen's face drained of color. "That's absurd," she stammered. "He's the one breaking the rules." But her defensive, flustered tone betrayed her. The response was immediate. The Channel 9 Facebook page lit up with comments, "Classic HOA corruption. That poor guy saved their homes and got punished. Time to audit every HOA in the county." My phone buzzed non-stop with messages from strangers, some sympathetic, others sharing their own horror stories of HOA abuse. By morning, the tide had turned. Neighbors who had avoided me now knocked on my door. "We saw the news," one said quietly. "We're with you." Even those who hadn't signed George's letter of support before were emboldened now. Karen's iron grip was cracking. But the biggest shock came that afternoon. My phone rang, and the voice on the other end was familiar: Ethan Cole, the cautious board member. He spoke in a low, urgent tone. "Cole, we need to talk. The board's calling an emergency meeting tonight. Everyone's furious. We had no idea about the forgeries. She showed us papers and we trusted her. That trust is gone." "Are you telling me," I asked slowly, "that you're ready to confront her?" There was a pause. Then, "Yes, but we need you there with your evidence." That evening, the community clubhouse was packed like I'd never seen. Not the sleepy dozen who usually attended HOA meetings, but dozens, maybe 50 homeowners standing along the walls holding copies of the newsletter that smeared me. The air buzzed with tension. At the front sat the board. Ethan looked pale but resolute. Karen sat in the center, rigid-backed, her eyes sweeping the crowd with disdain. She banged her gavel, trying to start the meeting with old business. But she didn't get far. George stood up. "We're not here to talk about landscaping fines. We're here to talk about fraud. We're here to talk about why my shed is full of mud because Cole's dam was torn down." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Another neighbor shouted, "And what about my $500 fine for a brown patch of grass during a drought? Was that based on a real rule or another one of your fakes?" The room erupted. Karen pounded her gavel, shouting, "Order, this is out of order," but no one listened. Then it was my turn. I stood holding my phone aloft. "Karen, is this your signature on the trespass complaint?" I swiped to the photo of her map. "And is this your car in my security footage at 6 in the morning, staging a violation?" Silence fell. All eyes locked on her. She opened her mouth, but no words came. She looked to the board for backup, but they avoided her gaze. Trent stared at the floor. Ethan leaned forward, his voice shaking but firm. Karen answered him. Her face crumpled. With trembling hands, she gathered her papers, stood, and without a word stormed out. Moments later, Ethan announced, effective immediately, Karen Whitfield has submitted her resignation as HOA president. The room erupted, not with chaos this time, but with applause. Cheers. Relieved laughter. After months of intimidation, the reign of the HOA queen was over. But as the applause died down, I knew this wasn't the end. This was only the beginning of rebuilding not just my dam, but the entire community. The night Karen stormed out of the clubhouse, her resignation hanging in the air like a thunderclap, I thought the nightmare was finally over. The applause still rang in my ears as I drove home. For the first time in months, I felt a spark of relief. But relief is fragile, and I knew better than to believe that decades of rot in Clearwater Ridge's HOA would vanish with one dramatic exit. The following morning, the board sent out an official notice. All fines against me were rescinded, including the $50,000 dam penalty, the $10,000 camera violation, and every petty charge Karen had stacked on top. They also announced a public apology would be printed in the next newsletter. On paper, it sounded like victory. But when I looked at my backyard, still scarred by the destroyed dam with mud-streaked fences and waterlogged soil, victory felt hollow. My neighbors were still nursing their own wounds. George's shed reeked of mildew. Clara's patio remained caked in silt. The flood hadn't just wrecked property, it had broken trust. That's when I realized this wasn't just about clearing my name. It was about repairing an entire community poisoned by fear and fraud. The first step was documenting the aftermath. I spent hours walking door to door with my camera, asking permission to photograph damages. At first, people were hesitant. Decades of Karen's intimidation didn't evaporate overnight. But once George and Clara spoke up, others followed. I snapped photos of cracked foundations, ruined gardens, warped fences. In total, nearly a dozen homes had suffered measurable losses from the flood. I compiled everything into a second binder. This one focused solely on damages. Elena helped me categorize them: property damage, equipment loss, landscaping destruction. If we present this properly, she said, the HOA will have no choice but to pay out of their reserve fund, and if they refuse, we'll take it to small claims court. Meanwhile, something remarkable began happening. The same neighbors who once avoided me now stopped by to talk. Some offered help with cleanup. Others just wanted to share their own HOA horror stories. A retired teacher admitted she'd paid hundreds in fines for holiday decorations exceeding size limits. A young couple said they'd been threatened with foreclosure for having a swing set visible from the street. It was like a dam had burst, not of water but of suppressed frustration. Sensing momentum, I printed more copies of the HOA harassment log and distributed them openly this time. No more slipping them into mailboxes at night. I handed them out in broad daylight right at the clubhouse steps, and people took them gladly. Within a week, nearly every household had their own log. Karen's reign of fear had ended. In its place, people wanted accountability. That's when the news segment's ripple effects hit. Channel 9 didn't just air my story once they followed up. A week later, a new report featured interviews with other homeowners across the county who had faced similar abuses. One clip showed an elderly woman in tears, describing how her HOA threatened to seize her home over a broken shutter. Another man displayed a stack of dubious fines, eerily similar to mine. Karen had unwittingly become the poster child for HOA corruption. The county attorney even announced an investigation into fraudulent practices among homeowners associations, citing my case as the spark. For me personally, the most surreal moment came when Deputy Morales knocked on my door again. My chest tightened when I saw his cruiser in the driveway, but his demeanor was different. He removed his hat, looked me in the eye, and said, "Mr. Hartman, I owe you an apology. I acted on documents that should never have been trusted. I was doing my job, but I see now I was misled." I studied him carefully, weighing his words. He looked sincere regret etched into the lines of his face. "Just promise me," I said quietly, "next time you see a piece of paper that smells wrong, you'll ask a few more questions." He nodded. "You have my word." That small gesture didn't undo the weeks of fear he had brought to my doorstep, but it mattered. It showed me that even the system Karen had weaponized could still be corrected. Still, the practical reality remained without the dam. Red Willow Creek was a ticking time bomb. Every homeowner knew it. That's why at the next HOA meeting, without Karen there to gavel us into silence, we did something unprecedented. We opened the floor to everyone. No rules, no scripted agenda, just voices. One by one, residents stood and spoke. George described the flooding damage. Clara demanded transparency. Others recounted years of bullying under Karen's regime. Finally, Elena rose, her engineering report in hand. She explained the mechanics of the dam in plain language, how it slowed the water, redirected excess safely, and prevented precisely the kind of flood we had just endured. She spoke with such clarity and authority that even those who had doubted me nodded in agreement. By the end of the night, the board, shaken and humbled, voted unanimously to commission an independent adjuster to assess damages and to draft new bylaws limiting the board's power. For the first time in Clearwater Ridge's history, the HOA wasn't dictating to the homeowners. The homeowners were dictating to the HOA. After the meeting, George clapped me on the shoulder. "Cole, you realize what you've done." I shook my head. "All I did was build a dam." "No," he said, grinning faintly. "You built a community." That stuck with me. Because in truth, I hadn't set out to lead a movement. I just wanted dry yards and peace. But sometimes standing your ground against one bully can inspire others to do the same. The next weeks were filled with rebuilding. Elena drew up blueprints for a new dam stronger and more efficient than the last. This time we weren't sneaking around with wheelbarrows of concrete at dusk. We had county permits, board approval, and half the neighborhood volunteering to help. George mixed cement. Clara brought sandwiches. Even kids carried buckets of gravel. When the final stone was set and the runoff channel smoothed, we stood together on the bank, sweaty and tired but proud. The dam wasn't just a structure anymore, it was a monument to resilience. And when the rains came again, as they always do in Colorado spring, we watched from our porches as the water surged, slowed, and then flowed safely into the channel. Not a single yard flooded. Not a single shed stood in mud. The cul-de-sac that once whispered rumors about me now cheered. I had gone from villain to vindicated, from outcast to neighbor. And Karen, she had vanished from Clearwater Ridge, her name now, a cautionary tale whispered in the hallways of HOA meetings across the county. But deep down, I knew this wasn't the end of the story. Because as long as HOAs exist, so do people like Karen, people who thrive on control, who bend rules until they break, who think fear is stronger than truth. This time, though, the truth had won, and we had the dam to prove it. When the new dam stood completed, and the rains proved it worked, Clearwater Ridge felt like a different place. For the first time in decades, the community wasn't ruled by whispered threats or arbitrary fines. Instead, people were smiling at each other on sidewalks. Kids played soccer in yards without fear of HOA. Letters and conversations no longer paused nervously whenever Karen's name came up. But while the surface looked calm, the undercurrent was still turbulent. The board might have ousted Karen, but the scars of her reign were raw. The county investigation made sure those scars wouldn't fade quietly. Within weeks of the news segment, airing subpoenas were issued. Investigators came to my house, sat at my kitchen table, and carefully flipped through the binder I had built, like an electrician tracing a circuit. "This is meticulous," one of them remarked. "You documented every lie, every forgery, every escalation." "It's the only way to fight someone who twists the truth," I replied. "You have to anchor everything in evidence." The investigators nodded and asked to make copies of my files. I handed them over gladly. For once, the weight wasn't all on my shoulders. Meanwhile, the HOA board scrambled to distance themselves from Karen. Ethan, the one who had shown the first crack of decency, called me privately. "Cole," he said, "we're meeting tonight. We want you there. Not to defend yourself, those days are over, but to help us rebuild." That evening, the clubhouse wasn't the site of chaos like before, but of resolve. Ethan opened the floor by admitting their failures. We enabled her, he said. We trusted documents without question. We let fear drive our decisions. That ends tonight. He turned to me. Cole, you exposed this mess. We want you and Elena to help draft the reforms. I wasn't sure how to respond at first. Part of me wanted to wash my hands of the HOA entirely to retreat back into my quiet retirement. But another part of me knew that if I stepped away, now the old patterns might creep back. Bullies always look for vacant seats of power. So I agreed. Together with Elena and a handful of neighbors, we formed what became known as the Community Oversight Committee. Our job wasn't to replace the HOA, but to keep it accountable. We met weekly, poring over the bylaws line by line. Out went vague clauses that allowed discretionary fines. In came hard caps: no fine could exceed $500 without a formal hearing and documented evidence. All violation notices now required time-stamped photographs, and surveillance cameras explicitly banned from being aimed at private homes. We also introduced transparency measures. Every financial record of the HOA would now be posted online for members to view, and every board meeting would be recorded. Sunshine, we agreed, was the best disinfectant. At first, some residents doubted the changes would stick. After all, Karen had seemed untouchable once. But when the next newsletter went out, it wasn't filled with threats or propaganda. Instead, it carried a bold headline: "New Era of Transparency Begins." Beneath it were summaries of the reforms and a signed apology from the board addressed to every homeowner. People began to believe. One Saturday morning, as I worked in the garden, Clara walked over carrying a tray of lemonade. "Cole," she said with a smile, "I never thought I'd see the day the HOA admitted they were wrong." George, following behind her, chuckled. "And to think it all started with you mixing concrete by the creek." Their words warmed me more than the sun overhead. I hadn't wanted to be a hero. I just wanted to fix a flooding problem. But sometimes fixing one problem reveals another that runs deeper, uglier. Not everyone was pleased, of course. Karen still had her loyalists, a handful of neighbors who had thrived under her rule, doling out petty complaints and enjoying the fear they instilled. But with Karen gone and the board's power curtailed, their influence dwindled. They muttered at the edges of meetings, but no one paid them much attention anymore. And then came the moment that cemented our victory. The county attorney's office announced that charges were being filed against Karen fraud, forgery, and misuse of authority. Her smug smirk, once a constant presence in our neighborhood, was now captured in a mugshot on the evening news. I watched the broadcast quietly from my living room, Sarah at my side. She squeezed my hand. "You did this," she whispered. "No," I said, softly shaking my head. "We did this. All of us who refused to be silent." The next HOA meeting felt more like a celebration than a civic duty. The room was packed again, but this time with laughter, not shouting. Neighbors shared stories, ideas, even jokes about installing a community barbecue pit, something Karen would have fined us for in a heartbeat. The mood was lighter, freer. As the meeting drew to a close, Ethan stood and said, "We owe a debt to Cole. He showed us what happens when one person refuses to bow to intimidation. We want him to know this community stands with him." Applause filled the room. I felt my cheeks flush, unused to the spotlight. When the clapping died down, I cleared my throat. All I ever wanted was to live in peace, to not see my neighbors' homes drowned every spring. But this fight taught me something bigger. Rules aren't the problem, it's the people who twist them. If we stand together, no one can do that again. The cheers that followed weren't just for me. They were for the idea that Clearwater Ridge was no longer under the thumb of one petty tyrant. That night, as I walked home under the soft glow of streetlights, I passed the lamppost where Karen's cameras once glared down at my house. They were gone now, removed by order of the new board. In their place, a flower basket swayed gently in the breeze. It felt symbolic, as if the neighborhood itself was healing. At home, I poured myself a glass of the whiskey George had given me when the dam first succeeded, back before all the chaos. I sipped it slowly, savoring not just the taste, but the hard-won peace that came with it. Yet even as I celebrated, I knew there was one chapter left: to write the permanent rebuilding of the dam with the full support of the community. This time, it wouldn't just be my project. It would be ours. And when the rains returned, we'd be ready not just with concrete and rebar, but with unity. For the first time in months, I slept soundly. The weeks after Karen's downfall felt like breathing fresh mountain air after months underground. But while the community celebrated, I knew the real test lay ahead: rebuilding the dam not as a rogue project condemned by fake fines, but as a legitimate community-backed safeguard. The county moved quickly now that the lies were exposed. Elena and I filed for an official permit with the Clearwater Engineering Department. This time, instead of forged stamps and smudged signatures, the paperwork came back with a bright blue seal and an inspector's name I could call directly. When I held that stamped permit in my hands, I almost laughed. If Karen had just followed the process, she could have avoided everything. But her lust for power made her cut corners, and it destroyed her. The day construction began, it wasn't just me and Elena hauling rocks. Half the neighborhood showed up. George brought his wheelbarrow, Clara made sandwiches, kids carried smaller buckets of gravel. Even people who had once believed Karen's lies came to pitch in as if lifting stones together could lift the weight of shame from their shoulders. The new design was stronger, more efficient. Elena adjusted the angle of the overflow channel, widening it to handle heavier rainfall. She taught the kids how to check water gauges, turning the project into a living classroom. I spent hours mixing concrete, sweat dripping back aching, but my heart lighter than it had been in months. By dusk, as we laid the final stones, the dam stood not just as a structure but as a monument to resistance to truth, to neighbors who had remembered they were stronger together. We posed for a photo, mud-streaked, grinning, tired, and it felt like reclaiming something Karen had stolen: pride. That spring, the skies tested us again. A storm rolled down from the Rockies, fierce and unrelenting. The creek swelled, frothing brown water hammering against the dam. I stood with Elena and George on my back porch, rain pelting our shoulders as we watched. The water rose, pressed, slowed, and then obediently spilled into the overflow channel. My yard stayed dry. George's mower, this time parked safely under cover, stayed safe. Clara's patio lights twinkled above clean, dry stone. Elena grinned. Gravity always wins coal, and so does good engineering. I raised my camera, recording the whole event, not because I feared another attack, but because I wanted proof of what we had accomplished. This wasn't a secret anymore. It was a legacy. After the storm, the HOA board hosted a community gathering. No gavel, no threats, just folding chairs, coffee urns, and a sense of unity. Ethan stood and spoke. We learned something hard this year. We learned that rules mean nothing if they're wielded by the wrong hands. But we also learned that one man's fight for what's right can save us all. Cole, this dam isn't just yours anymore. It's Clearwater Ridge's. Applause rose, warm and genuine. Sarah squeezed my hand, her eyes glistening. I stood, slowly clearing my throat. I didn't set out to be a hero, I said. I just wanted to stop my shed from flooding. But Karen taught us all a lesson: power without accountability corrupts absolutely. She thought fear was stronger than truth. She was wrong. Truth backed by evidence and community is unstoppable. There was silence, then another wave of applause. Not the chaotic clapping of anger or relief, but the steady rhythm of hope. As the meeting ended, neighbors came up to thank me, some with hugs, some with firm handshakes, some with simple nods. The same people who once crossed the street to avoid me now looked me in the eye with respect. That night, back on my porch, I watched the creek glisten under moonlight. The dam silhouette stood strong, water trickling softly through the channel. I thought about Karen, her smirk, her forged papers, her downfall. In the end, she had destroyed herself. The harder she tried to bend the truth, the more brittle her lies became. And I thought about what this fight had cost me: sleepless nights, fear of losing my home, my freedom, even my peace. But it had also given me something: a stronger bond with my neighbors, a renewed faith in community, and the knowledge that standing firm, even when you're alone, can turn the tide. Because that's the real story here. Not just a dam or a flood, not just fines or forged documents. The real story is that no matter how strong a bully seems, their power ends the moment people stand up together. So if you're watching this and you're facing your own Karen, whether in an HOA, at work, or anywhere someone abuses power, remember this document: the truth, stand your ground, and never underestimate the strength of unity. What happened here in Clearwater Ridge wasn't just a fight about water, it was a fight about dignity. And in the end, dignity won. Before I go, I want to leave you with this: life will always throw storms at you. Sometimes they come as floods, sometimes as people trying to drown you in lies. But storms pass. And when they do, what remains is the strength you built in standing tall. Drop a comment below with where you're watching from and if you've ever faced your own version of a Karen. And don't forget to subscribe, because there are more stories of truth and justice to tell, and you won't want to miss them. One thing I've learned through all of this is that there will always be Karens in life. People who use power rules or even lies to control and crush others. They may win for a moment, making you feel afraid, cornered, even tempted to give up. But the truth carries a quiet strength that no one can erase. When you stay patient, gather your evidence, stand firm, and most importantly, find allies who share your fight, you realize you are never truly alone. A united community will always be stronger than any petty tyrant. This battle with the HOA didn't just teach me about justice, it taught me about the value of neighbors and trust. When people stand together, when we decide to defend what is right, even the fiercest storms, whether they come from nature or from someone's abuse of power, cannot drown us. That's the lesson I want to leave with. You never underestimate the power of truth and unity. If you've ever faced a situation like this, I'd love to hear your story. Drop a comment below, tell us where you're watching from, and share your own experience. And if you believe stories like this need to be told, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Because there are many more tales of truth, courage, and justice still waiting to be shared.